My name is Dr. Daniel Haders, and I'm the Executive Chairman at Model Medicines. I'm here today chatting with Dr. David Moskowitz, Principal at 8VC and an investor in Model Medicines. David, I wanted to start today's conversation talking about your background and your accomplishments, because I think they're both very interesting and really one of the reasons why 8VC and Model Medicines are partners and what we're trying to achieve at both firms. So if you could tell me a little bit about your educational background, I'd appreciate it.
Definitely. Well, first off, thanks so much for having me and taking the time to chat with me. For starters, happy to go into that. My training prior to 8VC is broadly in the computational biology area. So my undergraduate degree at Brown was in computational biology, and I spent about 2 years there, including some time after I graduated, working with Soren Ishtrail, who previously had been head of informatics at Celera during the days of the Human Genome Project. And he really, even at that point, instilled in me the importance of thinking through the advances that at that point were still a little bit a ways on the horizon in terms of how genomics was going to transform everything. And I think serendipitously, by virtue of that, I started working with Illumina GA data back in the early days. This is circa 2007, 8, 9. And at that point, I transitioned on to Einstein College of Medicine, where I spent a couple of years, again, really just delving deep into the bioinformatics side of things. And after some time there, I moved on to Stanford, where I did my Ph.D. in Biomedical Informatics. Also did a master's in stats while I was there concurrently. And again, I think I had just the great fortune of being in the right place at the right time when it came to where the research tides were moving. At that point, I started focusing much more on immunology and in particular CD8 T cells, which of course have become a major force in which driven forward the recent renaissance in biology as applies to next-gen therapeutics. Then after I finished up there, I had the great privilege of starting at 8VC, where I've now been for about 4 or 5 years, have risen up here to the role of principal, and really focusing on fleshing out our biotech thesis, which is oriented around what we call BioIT, which is all about exactly what Model Medicines is doing. It's all about engineering and data and informatics and how that advances biology and medicine and healthcare. And I've had the great privilege of being able to shape our strategy on that basically from the outset.
David, I want to dive in a little deeper there because you've studied at several of the top institutions in the world, but you also joined a team at 8VC in the early days of when the firm was progressing from thinking about data and software outside of healthcare to data and software inside of healthcare. And as part of that process, you've risen through the ranks relatively quickly, all the way from an intern to your position now as a principal. And in that time, you've had a front row seat to see healthcare go from the way it was to now the way it is, both as an academic, as an investor. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that evolution and the convergence of biological data and software, both in your personal work as an academic, but also big picture in the world of venture capital investing.
Absolutely. So at 8VC, we have a pretty strong ethos around a particular investment tenet, which we call why now? And it's very much the idea that the most exciting opportunities tend to be ones that are newly enabled by emerging technologies. And I think that sort of perspective has been embedded in the way that I've approached science and investing throughout my career. I've really endeavored to be at the forefront of these things, and certainly 8VC has as well. And I think first and foremost, that's how we approach everything. So within the biology domain, as you noted, when I started a couple of years ago, it was just at that point when we were starting to see the transformative potential of data and engineering in the biology vertical. And I think over the past 5-ish years, it's been really phenomenal as things have progressed and as we've seen some of those early wins start to take shape.
That's amazing how you have seen things evolve over the last 5 or 10 years in this space. And you've had a front row seat for this convergence of software and data especially. One of the things I'm really interested in is getting a better understanding of not just the way that you look and understand the problem, but the way that you look at and understand the tools to solve those problems. For instance, it's one thing to understand a problem. It's one thing to understand there's tools to solve that problem, but it's a whole nother thing to actually build the companies using those tools that are actually solving problems, and then to find them and to invest in them. So I'd love for you to dive in a little bit more and talk about taking ideas and turning them into actionable insights that can fundamentally change the world. And what has been the catalyst to take us from those ideas into those actionable insights and then into results in this space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's the convergence of a couple of different factors. So one of them is that we're having innovation on all sides, right? So in the past couple of years, we've had incredible innovations on the biology side, things like next generation sequencing, gene editing, immuno-oncology, et cetera. And this has converged with advances on the technology side, right? I mean, most notably deep learning, but of course the entire field of ML has really been revolutionized, and the compute power that's available has really shifted, with the rise of cloud compute, AWS, GCP, Azure, the accessibility of these platforms to do really advanced things that previously would have been accessible only with, extremely large amounts of money and resource. I think the democratization there has really been fantastic, and that's the flip side of biology. Then I think all of these, they unify in a way that creates an opportunity for people to innovate in the private sector in ways that frankly weren't possible, 10 or 15 years ago. So when I was in grad school, we have in our main conference room photos on the wall of all of the graduates in our program's history over the last 35 years. And you could trace along, if you just go through the eras. In the first few decades, more or less everybody's in academia. And the reason for that is simple, right? I mean, if you went into industry, you were at big pharma just, shuttling liquids between test tubes and trying to eke out some, new chemical reaction. And it wasn't all that exciting. And over the past couple of years, you can really track that shift as many of the top minds are increasingly moving back and forth between academia and industry. And this is a reflection of the fact that cutting edge science and work and innovation is now really happening in the biotechnology sector in a way that just wasn't true in the past, in a way where you had to be in academia to be pushing the envelope. And I think as the tides have shifted, we've all borne the grapefruit of it, right? I mean, I think the cures that have arisen over the past couple of years, just really, it's the reflection of that paradigm shift.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I know that 15 or 20 years ago when I was in grad school, we had what by today's standards would be considered very basic modeling software that we used from a chemistry approach to understand temperatures, pressures, concentrations that would give us an ideal environment to synthesize the material that we wanted to. That software would take multiple days to run, and you could only run it on a local machine. And if something went wrong and the system timed out or there was an error, you would have to start all over from the beginning. And that could be a month-long process to run something that today we run in the cloud in literally a matter of seconds. So I'm with you, David. It's been fascinating to have this front row seat to see technology be used to change the way that healthcare innovation occurs and it develops. And so I want to thank you, David, for today, for providing us a background about you and some of the high-level concepts about how we got here in this bio-IT and biopharma revolution, combining big data with cloud computing all in one so that we can have the innovations that we see rolling out today. When we come back for part 2 of our discussion, I want to dive even deeper into 8VC as a firm and your firm's vision around bio-IT and your impressive portfolio that's established the firm as a leader in this space, developing a portfolio that contains companies that range all the way from innovative diagnostic companies to companies like Model Medicines that are developing therapeutics and changing the face of healthcare. I hope you'll all join us for episode 2 when David will be back to talk a little bit more about his firm.